Hey, if you're loving Creative Mind, check out some of our past episodes where we dive deep into topics like children's book illustration, video game design, filmmaking, and of course the most important topic of all, how do you make a living as an artist? So please hit subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on so you never miss an episode. And check out the show notes for links to our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube page for even more great content. Coming up next, the star killer herself, art director Amy Beth Christenson.
Somewhere in space, this may all be happening right now. 20th Century Fox and George Lucas, the man who brought you American Graffiti, now bring you an adventure unlike anything on your planet. Star Wars.
Here they come. Coming in too fast!
The story of a boy, a girl, and a universe.
Welcome to another episode in our Star Wars series, and this time we have a Lucasfilm and ILM veteran, Amy Beth Christenson. ABC, as she is more commonly addressed as, has been a concept artist and art director for over 20 years in the Star Wars universe, working on video games like The Force Unleashed, animated series like Star Wars Resistance and The Bad Batch, and now the feature films. Joining us for this talk is also former podcast guest and concept artist Jeremy Saliba, who helps take us deeper into the world of concept art and design. So enjoy our chat with Amy Beth Christenson.
Star Wars was the first movie I ever saw in a theater as a kid, a million years ago. And it really stuck with me. It kind of helped. I had a pretty nerdy family. We were all into sci-fi, Star Wars, and Star Trek and stuff. I watched it over and over and over again as a kid. And then we used to get the Starlog magazines, and I don't remember how old I was, but they had an article about Ralph McQuarrie and about how he drew the designs, the characters and everything for Star Wars. And up to that point, I didn't even realize that was a job or a thing you could do. And so then I decided, well, that sounds fun. I'm going to do that. And I just started drawing and drawing and drawing. And I never put the pencil down, I guess. And then I was just convinced I needed to go to art school. I come from a small farm in Kansas, so I didn't have anything to I didn't have anybody to tell me that it was a good idea or a bad idea necessarily. So I went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and then I also went to Ringling, and I majored in illustration. I took a bunch of 3D classes and a bunch of storyboard classes, and I actually got hired at Lucasfilm right after graduation. It's the only job I've ever had, which is, I don't know if that's sad or not, but it's I've been there for 20 years, but I've worked in the games division, LucasArts, and then I worked at Lucasfilm Animation on things like Clone Wars and Rebels and Resistance. And now I'm at the ILM art department as an art director working on films and other projects.
And explain to us, when somebody says art director, that's kind of, it's like art director and creative director are these two titles that seem somewhat mythic and somewhat like the hardest to explain. It's like, I'm an art director. What does that mean? I yell at you. What's a creative director mean? I get yelled at by him. For art director for film and for the projects that you're working on, briefly walk us through what the idea of an art director is.
I always kind of thought of myself as just, I'm still a concept artist. I just happen to have this title because I'm sort of still doing the same job I was doing as a concept artist. There are more responsibilities, like you are in charge of a team usually on a project, and you work more closely with the directors to kind of like establish the vision and the feel of what it's going to be. You're more responsible for the viz dev part of a project as well. But it's still day to day. I'm still using the same skill set, and I'm still doing, what I've always done as a concept artist. And I think that's about it, really.
Well, that's good, because I'm going to segue that to Jeremy, because that's where I kind of lose it. Concept art and viz dev is kind of a new thing to me, and it's fascinating and amazing, but I don't know much about it. So I'm going to let Jeremy ask you some questions on that, because I know he's got much better questions than I do.
We'll see. So working at Lucasfilm for now 20 years, you say, I grew up seeing Ralph McQuarrie paintings as well, but I concept art, it seems to me, as an industry, was established with the prequels, with the Phantom Menace. That's when concept art really so you were getting in there around that time, which is kind of amazing. So the concept art wasn't a major at colleges at that point or anything like that. So you had that illustration background, right? And that's what got you in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, looking through your work and the work that I've seen of yours, there's a tremendous cinematic aspect to what you're doing. That's not necessarily something they teach to illustration students, although you said you took some storyboarding classes as well. Like, did you learn that on the job? Was there a foundation element to that before?
I think I've always loved to read books. I've always seen every movie I could possibly see, that my mom would let me. Even then, sometimes I would get Dad to take me. So the storytelling aspect has always been the most interesting to me. I loved taking history of literature, history of film, history of art history classes in college, and I kind of soaked those up and took as much of that as possible. And it's helped me in my career, because then when you are drawing something, designing something, doing a keyframe, you're sitting there thinking about what's the storytelling aspect of this image, of this character, of this set, of this prop that's just a lead pipe. Like, what's its story? Like, and you work that in, and it all kind of goes to further that vision of what the story is going to end up being and what the director is trying to get across.
Yeah, anytime I ever talk to anybody whose work I really enjoy, every time they find the story. It's almost as if that's a really important aspect to this job.
Almost, yes.
Now, I think your cinematic eye goes even beyond that, though. Obviously, so you talked about watching a lot of movies, so clearly you were absorbing a lot of what you saw, because your staging, your focal points, your foreground, midground, and background, all these elements in the way that you handle values, again, it's tremendously cinematic. And like, for instance, looking at the Force Unleashed concept art that you did, which is a game I loved. Because game art, sometimes it's cinematic, sometimes it's not. With a lot of fixed, composition, that's not always as critical. But your concept art really did that, which I think enhances storytelling. But, is there anything that you attribute to understanding that real technical aspect? Was it observing film? Was it, influencing from co-artists and stuff? Or
I would say it was mostly everything that I had soaked up before. But the other thing that really helped, especially on Force Unleashed, is that, the directors, like Hayden Blackman, is a storyteller. He writes books. So everybody was really focused on this aspect of what is the story we're trying to tell. And, trying to design, like, the main characters like Starkiller and stuff, it was really, 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 like, what is their backstory? Like, we're not going to have a cinematic that describes this backstory. We need to look at the guy and know that he's, been living in the dungeon his whole life, and now he's kind of being brought out, and he's not in charge. Like, he has to answer to Vader for everything. So there was all of these things that's like, well, what can we do visually? Like, what are some unique takes on that for his costume, for everything, for his poses? I did tons of pose studies. I'm not an animator, but I did a ton of just silhouette pose studies. Is he always he's not going to stand up straight. He's not his own man. He's going to be a little bit crouched all the time. And what are some cool saber moves he can do while he's kind of in his crouched position? Wow, I'm going down a rabbit hole that I hadn't even thought of.
No,
so thank you.
I'm eating it with a spoon right now, because
the question, you had talked before we started, and that's a question that it blows everyone's mind. It's like, well, you got to tell a story, but we're not going to publish that story. You're not going to draw that story. You're not going to see that story, but we need to sit down and brainstorm this entire story for this character to exist. If you, like you said, we're talking about books, let's do 5 chapters on, why he has the lead pipe, why he's doing the thing. And that's just, fodder for fun. But if you're doing like a game where you're only going to see him on screen for a quick moment, you have to be able to do that. But yeah, keep going on that, because that's what we're here for. That's the gold.
Those stories help inform, right? If you're going to make a choice about a pose or about a shape, the backstory is going to help you cohesively create something that does tell something visually. But yeah, that his gesture alone, that crouched, ready, kind of like, almost monstrous Black Lagoon kind of arms out kind of thing that he had, and then holding the backwards lightsaber. He's got a unique silhouette just in his stance alone, separate from the costume.
And I thought, yeah, as a concept artist and in a visual development stage, I think it's especially important to kind of think those things through. And when you're presenting your options, to at least hint at it, right? So it's like if I drew a very straight, standing up straight Star Killer, looking very heroic, it didn't have the same effect as him looking a little bit broody and moody, like in a lineup. And the other thing I've learned too in Star Wars is just a cheat. This is cheat code. If you want to get anything approved and they have a lightsaber, make sure the lightsaber's on in the concept art for the character. Don't just have the hilt. You have to have the lightsaber on. So that makes a big difference too.
It's always so heartwarming when we talk to these leaders in the industry and they reaffirm the things. I've always talking to students in character design classes that gesture is a tool. It's another storytelling tool you have for what you're doing. And yes, there's a lot of concept art out there where it's just a standard pose with multiple costumes being explored on copies. And that's something people do to save time on a production, yes, but we're trying to be better. We're trying to create a portfolio that gets you noticed. These are the tools. And so, yeah, to hear you say that is, how that makes sense.
Isn't that also kind of like tapping people on the forehead going, hey, this is important. It's a lightsaber. Why are you not paying attention to this? Isn't that?
It's the cherry on the sundae.
Exactly.
And you can, if you bring someone a beautiful sundae and there's no cherry on it, they go, well, it's nice, but where's the cherry? And you go, okay, here. And you put the cherry, and they go, oh, now it's a sundae.
I think the more important, the bigger, broader picture here is use the tools and gifts that you are given for a design and don't overlook anything.
They're all opportunities.
Yes,
right?
they're all opportunities and everything. And I think kind of bouncing off what you were saying about, it's just costume exploration. For us, and in games and animation and film and everything, I think that that's something people kind of fall into really quickly is, this is just a costume exploration. It's not. Pretend you're a casting director. If you have a character, give them 3 to 5 completely different people, completely different body types, proportions, faces, hairdos, completely different costumes. They need to fit in the brief, but we're looking for the biggest range of ideas, like the broadest range of ideas. And the wider you can cast that visual net, the kind of the more valuable your ideas become to a project as well. So I think that, yeah, you kind of, it's easy to kind of devolve into that. It's just changing the colors or just changing the shoelaces, but it's not. It's much more important, especially the first couple rounds, to see how wild and wacky you can get with your visual problem solving.
So you're someone who obviously has been working both sides of the divide, from a concept artist to now an art director. And I mean, to me, that seems to be a top priority too, is to provide options, right? And I don't know, I try to surprise my art director. I try to innovate, right? And like you said, you have a constraint, you have a brief that you have to, a boundary you have to work within. So how much can you push up against those borders?
I have this kind of process that I've used for like the last 20 years, and it seems to work pretty good. For the first couple rounds, at least for the first round, I haven't shown anybody any designs, any options yet. That first time I show somebody to get approval or to start talking about it, I'm going to give them 3 to 5 options. The first one on the page is going to be the closest to what was described to me in a kickoff, in a brief, because I want the director to feel like I've really invested the most time and energy into their vision, which is true. But then I can start to sort of get a little bit crazier with options 2, 3. If I've got a lot of ideas, 4 and 5. And by the time you get to 5, it's like, I know you asked for a hippo, here's a giraffe. It still works. Like, it could work and stuff. So, you can kind of approach it that way. And it seems to work really, really, really well for me.
Yeah, that's like the job, really, right? Is to, because we're the cheapest phase, really, right? Let's come up with some wacky ideas and see, and even rule things out, as it were. So, as an art director, is that something you're hoping for as well?
Exactly.
From your artists? Absolutely.
Yeah, you need to see different problem solves, because it's like, if I had an idea for a direction, or more importantly, the director had a specific sort of idea, you want to know that, okay, that was a great solve, that was a good idea, that was a great base, and then I sort of evolved it a little bit, like each artist kind of like, well, I evolved it a little bit, you could go this direction or this direction or this direction too. And it just gives you more ideas that you can kind of work back into the story too. You know, it's like, oh, you might, maybe your idea number 3 was an evolution of the original idea number 1, and it actually does better at furthering the feeling of the story and the storytelling aspect, and actually pushes it in a way that, oh, that's still part of the story, but it's way farther in that direction. Let's now take that, and everybody now start kind of working off of this to see if it's going to break, if it's going to fit. So I think it's just inspirational, first and foremost, but also it's nice to work with artists that have original ideas and can explore all of these different things. And like I said, the broader their skill set for problem solving, the more valuable they are to a project, even if ideas 2 through 5 never get picked. It's just a valuable thing to have on the whole.
It all tends to kind of inform it, you know, all along. Even if, it doesn't get used, it helps find the direction.
You know, how does that work from a creative standpoint where you're creating, you know, if I'm a junior artist and I'm creating in a world where I'm in this closed ecosystem of Star Wars where I can do anything, but can I do anything is the question. Is there parameters? Is something like, okay, that's just too wacky. We can't possibly have Yoda jump up and down and do backflips. That's just not possible until it happens. And we're like, okay, I get it. It totally works. Is there guidance that you're giving, or even as you're seeing as a creator yourself, going, well, I'm in the constraints of a world, but a world that really has no reality that I am constrained by? How does that work when you're creating?
To a certain extent, especially if I'm working with a junior artist, or if I am the junior, I'm going to put myself in the position of a junior artist. If I had a wacky idea, but I wasn't quite sure about it, I'd go to the art director and be like, hey, I had this idea. Like, I want to run it by you before I draw it. If it's too wacky, if I'm way too off base. And then we'll have a conversation about what part of the idea is valid and what part is probably pushing it too far. But in general, I would say, don't be completely wacky with 2 through 5. Just reserve number 5 for your really wacky one. Because then you've just turned in a lot of really wild ideas that maybe aren't very feasible. But also, making those mistakes are important because you're going to learn every time you do it. Like for Star Wars, the 2 biggest rules are there's no visible buttons and no visible zippers on any costume, right? So it's the first time somebody draws like pajamas with buttons on them. You're like, hey, there's no buttons in Star Wars. Like, go back and double check it, right? If you don't believe me, go watch all the movies. And then you've learned, and then you're never going to draw buttons on Star Wars again. So it's things like that. Like it's an important learning experience as well. So don't reserve I wouldn't hold back too much in your ideas, but it's good to run them by if you're not quite so sure.
Well, then the flip side of that, because you and I had talked before we started, when you're doing art direction for a director, you said some directors are extremely creative and open to this process, and some are more technical. Some are thinking more on the technology side. How do you then interpret or pitch these ideas and these iterations you have to those 2 different types of directors, the creative and the technical?
I don't think there's any one proper equation that's going to be a fix-all for everybody, but it does go back towards the idea that as an artist, you need to kind of expose yourself to like as many situations and as many different directors and be open to feedback, be flexible all the time, because you're going to have different directors and they're going to have a different approach. And it's about working with those people to still get to the same end game. So it's just, you sort of need to build that experience of what it's like to work with different people and kind of like learn your way around, even just dialogue. Like, people are going to use different words to describe different things, and it's okay to ask questions and, be a little bit annoying if you think you're being annoying, of like, just ask a lot of questions. Like, do you mean this? And usually the good thing about our job is that people respond to pictures more than they do descriptions or words. So if you can describe it in a picture, then everybody's pretty okay, like being able to respond to that. But like I said, it's just sort of like be open and kind of like keep your head up a little bit from project to project to project to task to task to task and kind of figure out what other people are doing and kind of how you can apply that later on if it happens to you.
So you talk working with different directors and different styles, because there's also going to be, because I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, and I think that, you know, we're that's what we are. We're problem solvers, right? That's our job, is to find some visual solutions to these story issues that are coming up. And so when that's your job, and you're, you know, working with a director who's overseeing the project, then sometimes you might even disagree, but our job is still to facilitate their vision. That's what I've seen sometimes. I'll try to like show them maybe the avenue that I think works best, but sometimes they don't agree, and it's still our job to facilitate their vision, right?
Exactly. It's really important early on, I think, to even go over photo reference. I usually gather photo reference of even just lighting and mood, even if it's not even remotely like the same set, you know, that we might be talking about. And I'm like, is this sort of the feeling you're going for? Because it's more important to understand their direction and their vision as early as possible, so then you can kind of get on board with it and kind of start to live in it yourself and see how you can interpret this and give them what they want and not have that miscommunication happen later on.
So do you remember, like, when you first started, like, so you were a junior artist, you submitted a portfolio, all excited, coming out of art school, and ILM, LucasArts, Lucasfilm said, hey, yeah, we're interested, we want to see more, we want to talk to you again. You do a couple backflips, you do some cartwheels.
Yeah.
And so you were at RISD, you said? So you were on the East Coast?
I was at Ringling, yeah.
Ringling. So that's Florida, correct?
Yeah.
So then you flew out to California, interview. Mm-hmm. I assume George Lucas right away, right? That's that.
Oh, yeah.
Interview
it was
one.
him personally.
He's at the gate, right? He just stands there handing you your parking stub.
You get interviewed. They say, this sounds great. Come in. You start Monday. You know, we'll go over some stuff. What was your first job? Do you remember? Like,
yeah, I do, actually. It was really nice because I did have some 3D work in my portfolio, but obviously I had kind of concentrated on more of the illustration part. And when they interviewed me, they said, hey, we don't have any concept artist positions open yet, but we're in desperate need of an entry-level 3D modeler. And you've got, like, the bare bones of the skill set. And basically, it's, you know, we think you're going to be a good fit with the team, which is another really important part of the job. You're always working with a team. So it's like, be a good team player, right? Is like kind of the other 30%. Besides problem solving. And then, so I got started, but I was as an entry-level 3D artist. I had a lot of catch-up to do, but it's a great place. All of Lucasfilm, every department I've ever worked in is fantastic because everybody's the best at what they do. And if you don't know something, there's always like the guy sitting next to you, the girl sitting next to you that's like, hey, how do you do this? And they will work with you and teach you how to do things. So I think the last 20 years, I've just been learning nonstop, like different programs, different cheat codes, different like tips and tricks, like all this type of thing. So that was really nice. And then, but pretty early on, actually, even on that same project, concept art position kind of opened up. So I kind of eventually wheedled my way into full-time concept art, but I still use that 3D all the time. It's kind of nice because nowadays most concept artists, actually everybody I know, relies on 3D a lot for their base. And so that never went away for me. I've been using it the whole time.
Interesting that you got hired for one thing and then transitioned to another. Some people try to say that you can't do that whatever job, I've heard that before, that whatever job you get hired for is what you're going to be stuck in for the rest of your career. And I've had a few, positions in a few different companies, and I haven't found that to be true. And obviously in your case, you started as one thing and transitioned into the other.
It was a while back, but I didn't have any problem. And also, I would say, kind of related to that too, everybody I know that works as a concept artist or a viz dev artist, everybody that I know personally has worked in like at least 2 of the 3, either games, animation, or film. So I think there's a lot of bouncing around as well between those industries. So it's like if you really want to work on films, you're getting a lot of like interest in the game, like a games company's got a lot of interest in you, but you want to hold out for films. I'm like, I would actually, that doesn't seem like the case to me. It seems like you can kind of bounce around quite a bit pretty easily. So that's just my own personal experience, though.
So now, over the course of your career, you've been there for a while, a few projects. Now, when it comes to, Bobby was talking about like the constraints of working on a Star Wars project and what choices you can make. You said, no zippers, no buttons, being one of the constraints that you have.
You now just ruined the next watch for me, because now I'm just going to be sitting there going...
Just be looking at zippers.
So I imagine when it comes to the projects that I know of, the ones that you've been working on, a lot of the times it's working in between stories and in between things. So you can't push things too crazy because, if you're working on Clone Wars or, Rebels or Force Unleashed or whatever, you're in between some of the stories. So Darth Vader has to look a certain way. The universe has to be at a certain midpoint between two movies. So when you're trying to create something new and looking for something, inspiration, are you going back to then the source? Like obviously Kurosawa, Westerns, World War II. Is that Flash Gordon, Devil Dogs? Are those things that people still kind of draw from to kind of come at it fresh?
High fives for naming them all. Well done. Yeah, that was actually one of the biggest things I think for working in Star Wars is you kind of want to go back to what Ralph McQuarrie was doing, what Nilo, what Joe was doing, but more importantly, what were they looking at? What inspired the Falcon, which you got the old hamburger story, and all of these things. Kurosawa's like a must-have. You're going back and you're not just looking at the visuals, but you're reading the stories and you're watching the movies, and you're kind of you're trying to see what they saw. It's like, what was it that Ralph was picking up on? What was it that Joe was picking up on? And then you're doing your own take. You're sort of developing this rhythm of understanding what their mindset was and trying to put yourself in something similar. And then doing more versions of it.
Hopefully that way you're hitting cohesion, but as well as kind of unique, finding your own way forward from the same sources.
Mm-hmm.
They were inspired by Nilo. I've just recently done a deep dive, not as, Ralph, obviously a very celebrated concept artist for Star Wars, Ralph McQuarrie, and the most famous, arguably, Joe Johnston usually gets, obviously, the help with co-creation of Boba Fett and other things like that. But yeah, Nilo, looking at his sketches and I can't think of his last name at the moment.
Rodas
Jamero, thank you. And the inspiration from the street lights for the Slave One,
yes,
and everything else. And that seems like another aspect of Star Wars is finding strong geometric shapes. Obviously, Death Star, Star Destroyers, X-wing. It's always starts off with a little basic idea.
Yeah, and with the ships especially, because ships are my kind of favorite thing to design. And the fun part about that is going back to George's original, little Post-it note sketches. And his thing was, it needs to be simple enough in silhouette that a kid can remember it and draw it. So nothing's going to be too wacky. It's all going to be a triangle or, a circle and an H, like a TIE fighter. So it's really fun to kind of start with those things, find something that's new and unique, and then start to build the greebles in and everything. And there's also... I've gotten to work with him a few times, but Bill George at Lucasfilm, he is awesome and totally, I think, is one of my heroes. But he was in the original model department and worked, he built the B-Wings, he worked on Star Trek and Blade Runner, building the practical models. And one thing that I've snagged is somebody at work made a digital 3D file of all of the original model kits pieces that they actually used. So when it comes to the greeble parts, I can use the same greeble pieces that were on the Falcon. And you see, and you're going around this file and you're like, oh man, that's from the Falcon. I totally recognize what part of the Star Destroyer bridge that is.
You're getting a kit bash on the digital level at this point, right?
Yeah. But again, it just helps you
insane.
kind of get in this visual rhythm of you see the individual pieces and you're like, okay, I see how they were layering these.
Right.
And you kind of get in this, I'm going to keep using the word visual rhythm because I think it's awesome. And I came up with it. And
nice.
But it's kind of the same. You're kind of like, okay, these are the kind of the typical angles. These fit together. Okay, I'm going to have to put a turret in here. It kind of helps you a lot to kind of go back and try to recreate something. or make something from scratch using the same pieces. It really
Kit
helps.
patching from those originals, because I mean, essentially, it's a texture, right? The greebles,
Exactly.
it's so it should just be a thing that helps cohesion, right? A harmonious kind of cohesion visually, which is very cool. I started salivating when you started telling me how you have this access to an entire 3D library of all the classic greebles and everything. That's great.
It's just for the greebles. It's not for anything big, like you still have to come up with an awesome silhouette or the next big idea for a shape for a ship. But it does help quite a bit when you're trying to put those details in.
Especially with time constraints, right? I mean, it's not like you got all the time in the world to work on this stuff. There's a release date. There's a deadline.
Exactly.
There's things happening. So anything that can speed that up so you can maybe, have dinner with the family as well. Ain't bad with it as well. So one of the things I noticed too in your work is that now, if I remember correctly, you have some accolades in the fashion world. Was it a San Diego fashion show?
Yeah.
You had some work in?
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me about your interest there. And I mean, obviously it's a help for character design and concept art.
It is. It's a big help. I've always been into Halloween. And I've never done like cosplay, but I do love to kind of recreate and like sew up costumes and everything. So they had the San Diego Comic-Con, they had the Her Universe fashion show, and it was the first one. And I applied, and got, chosen to be in the show. It was a really fun experience. And I mean, I think most of the people there were professional. There were a lot of people there that had done fashion design and sewed, for a living. So I was sort of trying to play catch up and everything, but it was really fun. And I think the costume design, if you're interested in costume design at all, as a character designer, to actually kind of immerse yourself into that as a hobby a little bit, because it's going to inform a lot of decisions you make. You want to make sure these people can put these costumes on if they were really insisted.
Especially if it's live action.
It's like, yeah, you need to make sure there's zippers where there need to be zippers and there's seams where there need to be seams. And I can't do this whole outfit as leather because there's no way he'd be able to move, So it'll give you a lot of that like tactile, you're going to learn the difference between the different types of fabrics and how they move and help paint them, honestly, because the other thing, it's really kind of rare to see somebody that can really do paint flowing fabric with lots of realistic, like how it, like gravity and weight to it. So it's nice, and it helps you inform that a lot, because it's like, oh, I've worked with this. I know how heavy this fabric is. I can sort of like scribble this in pretty quickly. It helps across the board, because if you're not, if you're going to paint like the weight and the wrinkles wrong, it's going to get modeled incorrectly. It's just going to be like this kind of, I'm not going to say mistake, but it's, the end product might not be as strong if you're making, more incorrect decisions early on. So it's just all reference.
Hey, if you're loving Creative Mind, check out some of our past episodes where we dive deep into topics like children's book illustration, video game design, filmmaking, and of course the most important topic of all, how do you make a living as an artist? So please hit subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on so you never miss an episode. And check out the show notes for links to our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube page for even more great content.
Even with the historical influence in the Star Wars designs too, going back, I've been encouraging some of my students when they want to, some of them will say, oh, I want to take a class outside of visual development just for fun, but also to inform it. I will say similar things. I will say fashion's a good thing. I encourage them to take history of fashion, because that gives you a lot of then inspiration for it, at least the big block-ins for designs. Because, the Empire is a very fascist influence on the Empire's designs, and obviously kind of influenced by some of the, horrible armies of human history. And you study that, and then you get into Napoleonic kind of jackets too, or insignias and kind of things, especially if you're going towards a military kind of thing. And I think that can be really fun and informative, but I don't think about the materials as much too.
Kind of along those lines too, just because fashion is has a lot of psychological element to it. You're using in Star Wars especially, very psychological choices happening in the costume designs. Everybody who's a little bit off, bounty hunters, even Lando, weird color combinations. And like
asymmetry.
Asymmetry, but your hero characters, very symmetrical. Very neutral, natural colors for the good guys, very dark, heavy fabrics or armor for the bad guys. And then you have your anti-heroes, like when Luke shows up in Return of the Jedi, he's wearing all black. So you've suddenly broken those rules. But that's because you need to know he grew up. He's not wearing his white outfits anymore. We need to take him seriously now. Han is a mix and match because he's got like military looking pants, but like a white shirt and a gunslinger, and he's not wearing any armor, like that type of thing. But more importantly, actually, is Anakin from the prequels. He's wearing a Jedi cut, but it's heavy dark leather, and no other Jedi is wearing heavy fabrics or leather or dark. So you need to kind of be able to recognize those fashion choices when you're doing character design, especially in a universe that's already established. But yeah, I also took some I also took some some classes like in school that were kind of like, the human brain associates these colors with these things and stuff. So you can kind of use those in your toolkit when you're doing anything, designing anything as well. So it was an important class to take.
I always thought that with the dark leather choices for Anakin, it also coincided. I mean, obviously he's got the dark imposing future ahead of him and moods and rage and attitude. But he as a kid mentions, I'm cold. I'm cold all the time when I'm used to living in the desert. And so I thought that looks hot. It looks like a warmer outfit. And maybe he's more comfortable that way.
See,
I don't know.
It all adds up.
It's all ordained. So, I also want to ask you maybe a couple impossible questions.
Oh.
So, I don't know if you have a favorite character that you can think of, that you've designed, that you worked on, that you're proudest of, that something that, when you think, oh, one day when I look back on my career, this is probably going to be one of the highlights in terms of character design that you worked on.
Oh, man.
Yeah, impossible, right? For me, it's funny because the Raxus Prime costume for Jedi Force Unleashed, I don't know. A lot of when I do character designs now, that one shows up a lot in my character designs. I love it. I love the wrap. I love the head. I love the way everything, the balance of it. I love the thin quality of it on some areas, and then how it pops out in other areas, like at the wrists and stuff. I just think, it works so well. I use that one permanently in the game when I was using it. So that would be one of my favorites of what I know that you've worked on.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not quite sure if I have one. Starkiller and Force Unleashed are very near and dear to my heart. To this day, I loved working on that project quite a bit. So that's an easy answer, like anything from there. Honestly, I had a great time. I was the art director for Resistance, and it was really fun just working on background characters. Because it said early on, I want a lot, which is actually kind of unique for an animated show, especially a 3D one, is to really invest in background characters. But we did it. And we wanted a lot of droids, we wanted a lot of alien species and stuff like that. So we got and it was such a pushed style that we were able to get a little bit wacky with them as well. So I loved working on Flix and Orca and in any of there's this baby droid that's basically if R2 and a Gonk had a kid. It's this tiny little droid that's just toddling around in the background. That was great to work on. I had a lot of fun because there's a lot of freedom in those. And it was sort of like being a kid, and you can draw anything you want for Star Wars, go. So I think I appreciated that quite a bit. It was really fun. But there's a lot. There's a lot of them for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, with Resistance too. Yeah, that, like you said, that really pushed style. Obviously, that allows for a easier implementation of almost any kind of design principle. It seems like in there, so that would be a lot of fun.
That brings up another question that I know is a big part of concept art and visual development. How do you approach the character design versus the background and sets? I mean, they seem so connected, but almost, sometimes the background is more interesting than the character and vice versa. How do you approach those two different entities?
I actually kind of approach them the same. Kind of going back to our storytelling aspect, it's almost easier sometimes to tell a story with a background, with a set, than it is with a character, because you've got way more tools. Who lives here? How long have they lived here? How lived in is it? What are the little day-to-day? Did they leave their coffee cup on the coffee table? You're sort of designing it as a character for a specific reason. So there's a lot you can add into it. And so I always try to approach it the same way. It's like, this is furthering a story. How can I do it? What can I draw in here? What can I use for like lighting motivation for the set to kind of, does it need to be dark and gloomy and scary? So I'm not going to design a lot of lights. I'm just going to have like the bare light bulb, or like the, fire furnace underneath the grating, like underneath the floor, so I can get some creepy uplighting. You're sort of always thinking of, what is this room for? What's going to happen? What's going to be dramatic for the scene? Does it need to be dramatic? Does it just need to be, sometimes it is just a hallway to connect two rooms, but you still want to try to find ways to make it all meet up to, you're going from point A to point B, whether or not it's like, physically going from point A to point B, or like storytelling wise or mood wise or, beat wise. So you're sort of understanding your place, your design's place in that bigger story, and making sure it sort of all jives together.
It was the Carbon Freeze Chamber is probably my favorite set of all time, and grading, firelight, whatever. And I saw a video analysis where it was broken down that essentially represents a technological hellscape. You have the black magma floor, the blue twilight sky. You even hear bubbling sound effects in the background when you hear it, to reinforce that ideal. So this idea that Luke has been, dropped down into hell to face the devil in that moment. And psychology, color, shape. There's obviously spiderweb motifs throughout the whole series as well, where he's trapped and everything. So that's pretty cool. And so I think that's something that I also like, and I like that when it's done in Star Wars, is to have it be representational, trying to hide what it is, but make it unmistakably clear to the audience that this is good or bad or...
Yeah, I think it's the big thing. Working on Star Wars is like, everything's got a theme. So, you kind of wrap your head around that theme and deliver something that kind of fits in with it is nice.
So, so with character design, again, with Maris Brood, early passes, she was kind of piratey in the beginning, right? On Force Unleashed, in terms of that project that you enjoyed. But she ended up, still kind of like punk, sort of a gothy, punky kind of a character. It almost seems like, in terms of like her final look. But how much? That's a really fun way to approach a character. I love pirate designs. There's not enough buckles and belts and sashes and things like that.
Agreed.
How was it? Was it a matter of stripping away when you were designing her character? Did it start off with more stuff on it and then had to get reduced down, or?
I think the other thing is being flexible, because projects and stories go through iterations, even if you're sort of in production, things can change. And that's sort of what happened there too. It's, she had one sort of part of the story, and then that kind of changed, somewhere along the way. And so you sort of had, okay, what do we have to work with now? Like, we've already had this, now what can we do visually to make it still make sense, but, not overall. So sort of, I think with a lot of design tasks, it's like that too. It's not just all pretty awesome pre-production viz dev art. There's a lot of production art that happens as well, and where you're kind of like working within constraints and timelines and very specific needs and stuff. So that happens a lot. So it's just about being flexible and working really closely with like the character artists and the storytellers and everything, to still sort of like get things to a place where they're still going to fit. And there's going to be some compromise, some
casualties.
But being okay with it is part of the job. Yeah. I don't think she turned out bad at all, but I'm just saying, like, it was kind of like she had a different part to play originally.
Well, I try to tell my students a lot too. You're not making artwork. You're making a game. You're making a movie. That's the product you're making. Theoretically, people should never see your work. We live in a place where this stuff is celebrated and enjoyed, especially by the nerdier parts of our culture. But if it serves the project better, then that's what's got to happen. Another impossible question. So I don't know if it's the same one though. Like, do you have a favorite project? A favorite production that you've worked on? I know, right?
Yeah, that one is impossible.
Sure.
Because the part I love about the job is how wild and varied it is from project to project. Everything's like had its own unique, awesome place in my heart for different reasons, and I couldn't pick one.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you worked on everything, so it's hard to say. From cartoons to games to live action to everything else, like you've really explored the gamut. So and that's kind of impressive by itself that you had worked in all these different mediums.
How much separation is there between the games and film and animation? I mean, Star Wars as a legacy seems to have been the best example of all things conglomerating into one, where if you don't have the game, you don't have the if you don't play the game, you're not going to get the movie. If the movie, you don't get that movie, you're not going to see it's all like a great ecosystem. How do you see that going, or more, how do you think on those three different paths when you're creating?
I think just from a concept artist point of view, you're using the same skill sets, and you have to be able to do a little bit of everything because, at least in my experience, I've had to, and all the artists on the team, we've all had to do a little bit of everything. We've all had to be character designers and vehicle designers, and viz dev artists and storyboard artists and lighting concept artists. So everybody's got this broad skill set, and you're using those between the three, and your approach is the same. The problem solving approach is the same. But I would say just kind of on a project level, the games is a very iterative process. So the concept art's going to be iterative too. It's not just, oh, here's your main character. It's fine. It could be, but you kind of have to, the whole game is being tested and developed as you're drawing. So, you might have to go back and redraw something a few times, or, oh, these hallways aren't as big as we had gray boxed them. So now the characters have to be smaller. You can't have the giant mech hanging out in the hallway anymore. So we need to redesign this guy really quick. So it's a bit more iterative. It's a lot more collaborative and working really closely with a lot of different disciplines, at least in my own personal experience. And then for animation, there is a really quick viz dev development period. The visual development period is usually very short and very quick. So it's about getting a lot of ideas out really quickly, and not really as finished as you might like, but you're just kind of getting through these. What's the basic feel for the story going to be? These are kind of basic feel for the main characters. But then you're really quickly jumping into production. So you have to be a production artist. And then you're really specifically designing for a script, for specific stories, for specific, characters. And it's a little bit more streamlined. And then for film, it's a little bit of everything. It's working really closely with the director, and it's very iterative still. But you're sort of like, you're concentrated on your task, and kind of helping develop that visual world and that story. But it can also lead into post-production. So it's like you have to
Especially
do matte
days.
paintings now.
Yeah.
We filmed these characters against a blue screen. What's the background going to be? And you're constrained to, like, the camera's fixed, characters are fixed. I've got to do something that works for everything. And this is my box. This is my ballpark. I can't go outside of it. So it's just having all those different mindsets and being able to kind of jump around and do a little bit of everything is important across the board. But that's sort of how I've used them in the past.
Interesting how, concept artists are being involved in post. Like, we had a guy come and speak. Holly Wirtz is his name. And he's worked on some stuff there, and he was telling us about how he was working on Civil War, and they were finished filming, and they realized, we don't have any interiors for Iron Man's suit when Ant-Man's in it. We haven't come up with that at all. And I guess it was like Christmas time, and they needed it, and they're like, hey, he was like, okay, and he went ahead and got it all done. And you had to die. Like you say, it's the same process. Reference die first. What was that going to look like? Circuit boards. What do the insides of computers look like? Let's do that. And make it a cityscape, but with that kind of material as its level of construction. So us being involved in that side of things is kind of interesting too. What would you say is the most, like, longest or the most involved, like the biggest project you've been a part of?
Probably The Force Unleashed, because for a game, at least back in the day, 5, 6, 7 years. And I was on it from first day to last day, which has been nice. I've really enjoyed that. And even in the animation, I joined Clone Wars around season 4, but for Rebels and Resistance, again, like from day 1 to last day, being on it, kind of seeing the whole thing through and being a part of the whole process was nice. But I think it was more involved in games. So Force Unleashed was... I have this joke because I'm still kind of friends with Sam Witwer, who played Starkiller. But like whenever... if we end up like if I see him at a convention or something, it's be like, oh yeah, my job was drawing his face for 7 years, so I guess I'll draw his face from memory.
It's hardwired into your DNA by now.
Exactly, yeah.
So now, because we're a podcast for the Academy, we have all these students. They would be a bunch of. If we ended this without asking, the question, what would you recommend? What are you looking for? Yada yada. A million souls would suddenly be silenced. There'd be a great disturbance in the Force. What would you say is important to keep your eye towards when developing work for a place like ILM, working on Star Wars projects, or in general? And what kind of things are important that you think they should be keeping in mind, or what are you not seeing enough of?
Again, it might just be my own personal kind of journey at Lucasfilm, but it does seem like everybody else that I've worked with there on everything. We're not focused on one thing. We're not just a character artist. We're not just a storyboard artist. Everybody has to do a little bit of everything, because you never know, that next script or that next project might not need robots, might not need, that one thing that you're known for and really good at. It's okay to have your passion and your strength, but I think it's always nice to see a portfolio where, somebody who's definitely focused on character has also taken a crack at a really cool set that they've tried to turn into a character, or used here's some lighting studies where I tried to play the character of this with the light is the character, like seeing that type of thing. So seeing more of a broad skill set. Honestly too, I don't know, it depends, especially if you're getting into animation, different styles is important. I've had to draw in different styles my whole life. Like, Resistance was very different from Clone Wars. Film's very different from animation, and games has its own sort of flavor as well. So it's sort of like just try things, because the other good thing about trying these different styles and these different approaches, are you going to learn something about yourself as an artist as well. Like, you're going to break out of your comfort zone. You're going to learn more about yourself. Like me, I didn't think I would be a vehicle designer, because that's just not really where my brain was at the time. Turns out I love it. It's my favorite thing.
Really?
Give me all the ships. Yes.
What was the attractive part of that?
I do love that sort of like start the Star Wars thing of starting with what's that basic shape going to be that a kid can draw. Like, because it's easy to get really complicated really fast. So it's like, now you're reinventing the triangle, you're reinventing the circle. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Or putting them in a combination that hasn't been seen before that still feels Star Wars, right? Like, it's a huge problem to solve. The next Star Wars ship that feels like Star Wars, that's not like, oh, it's just an A-wing with something on it. Like, that's a really fun challenge, and it's the biggest problem to solve, I think, visually. So I enjoy that the most.
It's interesting, obviously, because you also, whatever, I guess one of the biggest things is obviously you're working on something with a huge pedigree, right? Some of the best artists in the world have come before on these projects and worked on stuff, and now the job is to continue that. Hopefully, I remember Ian McKeg once said when he was designing Darth Maul, I'm not going to out-helmet Darth Vader. He tried, and he stopped. He wasn't going to be able to do that. And, is anyone going to ever outdo the Millennium Falcon in terms of a design, or even Slave One? It's cool to try. There's some really cool ships, and, you never know. But it's tough, I think, right? Also to kind of work within, live up to that, but also keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing about keeping it simple, too, by the way, that I also love is that one thing I also try to get across to students is that a big part of our job is to sell toys. That's part of our job, right? That's part of a successful franchise. And
always think of the Lego set, yes.
It's funny, but that's going to keep money flowing, ultimately. Like, and if some people like your work, and if it's understandable to a large swath of people, then that's a higher level of success, which must be a factor, I think.
I don't go into a design thinking, okay, this better be epic because of the toy or whatever. But
Sure.
I will say it's been nice, like working on projects where you go over and you look at what somebody's done and you're like, I would spend $500 on that Lego set. Like, so you don't go into it thinking that, but you know, it's awesome when you see something come together.
Could you 3D print one of those real quick, just for reference? Just so I have it on my desk.
Sometimes the designs that I don't enjoy as much are the ones that you can tell that wasn't the simple shape language isn't quite as present, you know, or something. It felt like that wasn't as much of a thought process. I tend to, the ones that I really gravitate towards that I see being really successful are the ones where they start off with a relatively simpler kind of recognizable base. So I find that encouraging, generally speaking, because then, you go back to simple stuff and then make it complicated. I like that way of doing it.
I think with everything, even with characters and stuff, you always want to work on a silhouette. Like, what's a distinctive silhouette? Again, gesture. It can be the gesture that makes it distinctive as well. But, it's sort of finding that shorthand. You might not show your shorthand to an art director or get it approved, but it's nice to do like that. I'm going to give myself half a day to do these studies and kind of what's standing out to me, and then take that to the next level.
Well, to wrap it up a little bit, I do have we've kind of danced around it, but I want you to, tell us, what's your hope? What's your character? What's your favorite thing that you want to bring in? What's the, hey, here's my special book of characters that I think should be in there. Is there anybody you want to see in the Star Wars universe that you are slowly trying to ham fist in and make sure that this character is there?
No, I actually think I've been there long enough. I've managed to get wedge in.
Nice.
I mean, because my favorite EU character is Thrawn, so that was I actually got to get that task for putting Thrawn in Rebels, so I got to design him. That was fun. Mostly it's just sort of like, I like to come up with the dumb names for things. So, like for Force Unleashed, it was like, okay, there's Ugnaughts and they're driving a mech. And I'm like, oh, it's a big mech, so it's like Juggernaut. Okay, what if we called it the Uggernaut?
Nice.
And so we started, like, the team started calling it the Uggernaut. And then finally they're like, oh, you know what? We need another mini-boss. ABC, give us an Uggernaut. So, it's like I come up with, it's just kind of coming up with these silly little things sometimes, and then turning it into something that is a real thing.
It's very Star Wars, though. Dengar, these names that are just kind of sometimes two syllables mashed together, too. That's pretty cool.
All right, Jeremy, any last questions you have for Amy?
No, I mean, I have. I know, and also 1,000.
I know. I know. Well, there's that one question I do want you to kind of key on give us some more tips on, because I mean, there's students and there's also us working professionals who are just fans of Star Wars, and the idea of fan art and working with IP. And I know I talked with Jeremy a lot about this. What are some tips on that you can give from inside the great universe that people should be thinking about when it's, if you want to be working with Star Wars IP and you want to be, drawing your version of something, what is it something you think people should focus on and keep in mind?
I think we did sort of what we previously covered a little bit were some of my bigger points. I think, like, look at what Nilo, Joe, and Ralph are looking at, and sort of do your own original take, be inspired by the inspiration. And again, just be a nerd about gathering reference and about, studying the psychology of things and the storytelling, the Joseph Campbell, the Kurosawa. Like, that all has valid DNA in Star Wars. So, spend that time to sort of like immerse yourself in that inspiration and that world and that way of thinking. And I always think it's a great idea to kind of come up with your own story, your own characters. And I think through this whole thing, we've been talking too about how storytelling in art is so important. So I think that's another reason why it's a good idea to kind of come up with your own story and characters. And then you can here's some keyframes. Here's some character designs. Here's some vehicle designs. You can kind of present your world in a nice little package, that's sort of like easy to understand, easy to read, and not just like one or two like pieces that don't really have too much in common with each other. It is a lot to think about, because it's also color and lighting are a camera is very important in Star Wars as well. So it's like, if you're going to do a keyframe, make sure you're using kind of a standard Star Wars like camera and camera angle, that type of thing. The VFX are sort of in the VFX language and everything. So there's a lot to think about, but I think with any project, even if it's Star Wars or not, because I've had to work on some non-Star Wars stuff too, but it's I need to kind of spend that time immersing myself in what does this look like and feel like, and how is this different from everything else? So sort of like getting your brain in the right spot is important. And I usually spend about half a day doing that, at least.
That's good, because then as you move forward, you've got that flavor, right? You've got that kind of vector planted in yourself, so you can hopefully move forward with confidence. I would also say, too, to me, a good example of everything you're describing was that the ILM Art Challenge on ArtStation a couple of years ago. They did, Bobby, for anyone who's listening who's not familiar, ILM did an art challenge contest in collaboration with with ArtStation, and basically gave out these ideas, like artists kind of did visual development projects for ILM. I mean, it was intense. It was like a full work week for a week. It was the real deal, it felt like. And artists had different stages and would get guidance from ILM once they were picked. They would submit something, and a lot of people came up with a lot of different choices and a lot of different ideas within the universe. And they ended up picking three place, because there was prizes. Like Cintiq was a big prize. Anyways, they had prizes, and there was the top three people who won. Very different styles in the top three people who won. And so, just like what ABC's talking about, like when working in different styles, when you have that, when you see different styles or working in different styles on the same project, you start to isolate what's important amongst those things. Then it's not necessarily how you render or, all that kind of stuff. It's like what colors and shapes are you using that end up being the thing that are the most consistent across all those mediums.
Exactly. That's a great example. I was on a team of judges for that, and it was interesting being in the same room as everybody who's been doing this, like Doug and, Alex Jaeger and stuff, and Knock. And we were all drawn to similar things for that same reason. It's like, this person has put themselves in the mind of Star Wars, given us something original and unique. And you're immediately looking past some of that technical stuff and some of that, exactly, the stylization. Because you can tell when somebody understands, it's the DNA again, but you know what I mean? It's like they've got that sort of visual rhythm of what's happening in Star Wars.
Visual rhythm, that's right.
But use that one more time. It's patent pending.
Well, what's interesting about that is that a lot of times students want A plus B equals C, ABC. They want an equation of how to be successful, and sometimes though that secret X factor isn't definable, and that's almost kind of what you guys were noticing. I mean, you're doing your best to define it. I think you did a good job of kind of saying, study it, immerse yourself in it, become aware of the camera, things like that. That's a good insight.
I think visual rhythm is our takeaway from all of this.
Yeah.
Because I'm going.
We'll make some t-shirts. I'll get you guys some t-shirts.
Right. Exactly. Visual rhythm with ABC.
So there you have it. Everything you wanted to know about how to create the world of Star Wars, how to create concept art. And as more and more art and design career opportunities are on the rise, employers are always on the hunt for the next generation of talented and, of course, skilled creative professionals. At Academy of Art University, you will get those work-ready skills that employers want. You can study on-site in downtown San Francisco and, of course, right now, anywhere in the world with our online programs. To request info about our 40-plus areas of study in art and design, visual development, game development, UX design, and more, visit our website at academyart.edu/creativemind. I'm Bobby Brill. Thanks for listening.